Early Conroy, a friendly, sunny-natured man with a constant smile on his face, was a troubleshooter and negotiator for his company. Travel was part of the job. When he traveled, he always left a detailed itinerary with Susan, his wife. Susan, a lawyer for a large firm, always informed him in detail as to her schedule. It was automatic after all these years together. A business problem called early out of town. This one a long trip to Los Angeles scheduled from Tuesday through Saturday. He had planned on catching the return flight out of Los Angeles at 9:15 Saturday evening. As usual, his car was at the SeaTac airport. He would be home and with Susan by 1 a.m. Sunday morning at the latest. Thursday morning, the deal suddenly came together. The people he was negotiating with signed the contract by 11 a.m. and left to deal with a crisis in one of their East Coast operations. With the change in plans, he could take the 1:45 p.m. shuttle on Thursday and be home by dinner. He rushed to the airport. He wanted Susan to know he was on his way home. So, once in the air, he called Susan's office from the in-flight phone. "Jensen, Sharwin and Anderson, how may I help you?" The receptionist greeted him. "Oh, where's Jennifer?" Early asked. Jennifer, Susan's personal secretary, usually answered Susan's calls on the direct line Early called. "Mrs. Conroy's secretary is out of the office today and tomorrow. May I help you?" Came the perky response from the office receptionist. "May I speak to Mrs. Conroy?" he asked. Mrs. Conroy is tied up at the moment. I'm not sure when she might be available. Would you like to leave a message for her?" was the reply from a suddenly mildly flustered receptionist. Something in the woman's voice activated Early's well-trained people skills. He thought for a moment. "No, thanks. I'll call back later," he said, and he hung up. The conversation with the receptionist troubled him, but it took him another half hour to put his finger on it. Susan told him on the phone last night that she would be in the office all day today. Still, it was possible she was working on a legal file or with a client and couldn't be pulled away. The real stickler was Jennifer's absence. Susan made it a point to have Jennifer working the same hours she did. The only times Early remembered Jennifer out of the office when Susan was working were when she was sick. The plane landed on time in Seattle, and he was home by 6:35 p.m. Susan wasn't there, and the house was dark, which was surprising. The only times his wife worked late was at her office. If she was with a client, she was almost always home by 6 p.m. He called her private office number again, only to get the answering machine. He left no message. Early unpacked, tossed his dirty linen in the hamper, and changed clothes. When Susan wasn't home by 8 o'clock, he made himself a toasted cheese sandwich for dinner. He started to sit in front of the TV to wait, but worrying about Susan overcame him. Had she had an accident? But if she had, someone would have called the house and, at least, left a message. He was too restless to sit still, and he found himself pacing the floor. He dialed her cell phone, but received the out-of-service message, indicating the phone was turned off. The suspicion something was terribly wrong had grown to a hot ember by 9:20 when his own cell phone rang. "Early, I was getting worried when I hadn't heard from you, but then I realized my cell was off. I'm so sorry about that." "No problem. Where are you?" Early asked. "At home," she replied. Was there a change in the timbre of her voice, or had Early imagined it? "I'm just finished cleaning up the kitchen. It's been lonely around here without you." "I miss you too, baby," he replied. His eyes were fixed on the darkened, deserted kitchen of their home. No wife there, he thought. He said, "I tried to get you at the office this afternoon." He let the sentence hang and waited for Susan to reply. "I was there," Susan finally said. "They told me you couldn't be interrupted. Something important going on?" I was working with John Stickner. He got me through that mess with the Melrose account this week. I owe him big time for that," she said with a voice that seemed to have a hidden meaning in it, one which Early couldn't yet fathom. "Honey, after I was able to turn that disaster around, it looks like I'm going to get that partnership. Mr. Jensen practically promised it to me." Susan crowed. "Isn't that grand?" "It sure is, honey. We'll have to celebrate when I get back. I'm just sorry I wasn't there to get the celebration off the ground." "Don't worry about that, love. Will you be home Sunday as scheduled?" Susan asked. "Right on target," he replied. "We can start our fiesta Sunday when you come home. It's going to be lonely in that big bed without you tonight." After chatting about domestic issues for a few minutes, they broke the connection. Early thought of the many lies Susan had thrown at him. Until tonight, he believed his marriage and their love was solid and strong. It had been something he never questioned. Now he feared the worst. Early Conroy was a man who always chose action over inaction. Discovering facts and making decisions under pressure was what he did for a living. He suspected his wife was lying to him, and he needed more information. He began to go through Susan's belongings, writing down on his legal pad anything he thought was missing and carefully returning everything to its exact place so she wouldn't discover his investigation. He inventoried her clothes, her chest of drawers, and her closet before turning his attention to her medicine cabinet and cosmetics. He finished with her home computer. The computer yielding nothing but the clothing search proved fruitful. She had not taken sporting clothes, such as things she would wear if she was going to play tennis. She had taken her slinky black cocktail dress, a stunning pantsuit, and her best high-heeled shoes. She had taken her sexiest lingerie. She hadn't taken her regular swimsuit but her bikini. The one she refused to wear anywhere except in their own backyard by their hot tub was missing. Most significantly, her birth control pills were gone from the medicine cabinet. Early knew his wife's habits. If she thought she might be gone overnight, she packed those pills. Since Susan had mentioned John Stickner, Early decided to begin there. He found Stickner's address in Susan's home office Rolodex. They owned a dark green Explorer used to tow their camping trailer and for trips into the Cascade Mountains. Since they rarely drove it in town and it was a common vehicle in a common color, it would be less conspicuous than his Mercedes. He drove the Explorer to Susan's Bellevue office, entered the parking garage, and drove directly to her private parking space. Susan's gray BMW wasn't there. To be sure, he checked every car in the garage before departing. With a sinking heart, he drove towards John Stickner's home. He found it in a wooded area in the exclusive Medina area. The grounds were surrounded with an 8-foot red brick fence and heavily shadowed with towering fir trees. As he slowly drove by, he saw Susan's BMW parked beside the garage where it didn't block the circular driveway. The house was dark, without a light to be seen. Death can come slowly with old age or the ravages of cancer. Death can come quickly, with the screeching of tires on the highway or a heart attack. However death arrives, there is intense pain. A pain no one can share or relieve. The death of love is the same. Quick or slow, there is enervating pain. With Early Conroy, it came quickly as he sat in a green Ford Explorer on an exclusive street outside an expensive home wherein his beloved wife, Susan, was cheating with another man. Early felt his body tingle and a cold, clammy sweat break out on his forehead. He threw open the car door, took a single step, and fell to his knees to puke out his guts in the damp grass. He puked until only green bile remained. Wobbly, he staggered to his feet and climbed back in the driver's seat. He started his car and went home. When he got home, Early called Steve Majors, the head of security at his company. "Jesus, Early, it's 1:15 in the morning. What the hell's wrong?" Steve exclaimed. "I need the name and number of the private investigators the company uses," Early said. Steve gave Early the name of John Wells and Wells' home phone number. "Anything else, Early?" Steve asked. "I want my phone bugged," Early replied. "Tell Wells. They'll do it. Do you want to talk?" Steve said.
No.
"Thanks for the information," Early replied. Early called John Wells and explained what he wanted. By 4 a.m., the Stickner house was under surveillance. Early had no desire to sleep or drink or eat. He was a man possessed with a single thought: end his marriage as quickly as possible. He could not stay married to Susan. He didn't love her. Not now. Her betrayal severed his love like the falling blade of the guillotine severed Louis XVI's head. Nothing could repair it. Early knew men and women who had taken back their spouses after adultery. Once, he thought that was both civilized and loving. But now that he was the sea, he couldn't imagine a man letting a cheating wife back into his bed or his life. Early went to the basement room where Susan stored old things. There were boxes of hers he had never opened. Now, he rummaged through them. He read her high school and college diaries. There he found evidence she was sexually active with 8 men before he met her. She had told him 3. He wondered if that was the first lie she had ever told him, but he found nothing to indicate she had cheated on him. He found references to him and how she loved him and loved it with him. They made his stomach churn. At 6 a.m., he called Paul Landon, general counsel for his company. Paul was already at his desk in the office. Early asked Paul for the name of the best divorce attorney in the Seattle area. Her name is Cynthia Rogers. I'll have her call you, Paul said. 10 minutes later, Cynthia Rogers called Early. They talked for 20 minutes as he told her his situation and what he wanted out of the divorce, and she gave advice. She promised divorce papers would be filed before the day was over. Early returned the task of searching through their belongings for clues without uncovering any more. At 9, Early was at their bank. He began by purchasing bank money orders payable to his attorney and his private investigators for their estimated fees. He opened a new account in his name only and transferred half the money remaining in the joint accounts to it, before removing his name from the old accounts. He was home by 10:15. By 10:30, all joint credit cards had been canceled. He thanked his lucky stars that they had kept separate brokerage and investment accounts, so he didn't have to unravel their investments. He did contact his broker to remove Susan's authority to use his accounts. Since it was clear Susan wasn't coming home, he called her office. When the receptionist answered instead of Jennifer, he just asked if he could speak with Mrs. Conroy. When she told him Mrs. Conroy wasn't available, he thanked her, told her it wasn't a pressing problem, and asked when he should call again. She's out of the office on personal business and won't return until 9 o'clock Monday morning. Would you like to leave a message? Was the friendly response. Early left no message for her. Early pulled the Explorer out of the garage and drove toward Bellevue, stopping for a breakfast so belated he had to call it brunch. It was 11:30 when he sat down and ordered eggs and pancakes with hot tea. His stomach was too upset to take coffee. Eating slowly, having to force each bite to stay down, he finally finished the meal, paid for it, and left the restaurant an hour later. He returned to the road past Stickner's place. Susan's car, still in Stickner's driveway, had not moved. His PI was nowhere to be seen. Early called the PI firm from his cell phone and asked for John Wells. In a moment, Wells came on the line. I'm out by the Stickner place, and your operative isn't here, Early said coldly. Shit, man, get out of there, Wells replied. If they saw you, it will blow everything. But, Early began. Get out of there. Go somewhere, park, and call me back, Wells ordered. 10 minutes later, Early called Wells again. All right, what's going on? Early demanded. Are you parked? Wells asked. Yes, Early replied curtly. Wells said, our first operative is back in the office, but his replacement is on site. Wells chuckled. We're old pros at this, Mr. Conroy. You aren't supposed to see us. Where is he? Early asked. There's a park behind the Stickner property. He parked on that street, worked his way to Stickner's property line, and climbed a tree. We have proof positive of your wife's adultery, Mr. Conroy. Wells waited, listening for the slightest clue of Early's state of mind. He had never met his client, and he didn't want anything bad to happen. It was the reason he told him to park before they talked. Finally, he heard Early breathe. It sounded like a shudder. Go on, Early said. His voice sounded drained. It's a good thing you called us in the middle of the night. It seems they like early morning action outdoors by his hot tub. What do the pictures show? Early asked. Do you really want to know? Wells responded. I do, Early said. Everything. But the best are of them doing it doggy style. Both of them were facing our camera, and our man clicked away. Wells waited almost a minute before asking, since we have the proof, do you want to continue the surveillance? I mean, the meter is running. Keep after it until I tell you to stop, Early replied. When can I get prints of the photos? Later today. He took over 200 shots, so we haven't developed them all yet. Give me 15 or so, all in 11 by 15, and all showing their faces. We'll deliver them to your house. Any for your lawyer? Not now, but I want all the pictures developed so we can send them to her later, Early replied. Early drove home, his mind numb from loss yet thinking clearly. His marriage and the life he had enjoyed were over. He wondered if he would ever smile again. He wondered what would become of him. Whatever it would be better without Susan. On that point, he was perfectly clear and without a doubt. Home wasn't home any longer. It was a house. Nothing more. Yet, Early hated it. As he drove into the driveway, he was tempted to go out to a motel or sleep on the damn street or anywhere but there. He steeled himself and parked his car in the garage. There was too much to do to walk away now. Early called Catherine Means, a realtor they knew. Catherine and her husband were old friends of theirs. "Hi, Early," Catherine said brightly. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this call?" "I want to sell the house. Can you come over now to do the paperwork?" "Are you and Susan moving?" Catherine asked. "We're getting divorced on grounds of adultery. Hers, not mine. The house is in my name only because I bought it before we married, so I can sign the papers. But I want it done now, Kathy, and I want the for sale sign up in front by 7. Early, Catherine began.
No counseling.
"No discussion. You're a realtor and I'm a home seller. Nothing more. If you can't do it that way, I need to find a realtor who can," Early said. "We'll do it your way, Early," Catherine replied. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Early had not picked Catherine idly. She loved to talk. She would spread word of the Conroy divorce and why it happened in their social group and beyond. She might even come on to him. She had once before at a party given by a mutual friend, but he had turned her down. He hoped she wouldn't approach him now. You know what didn't interest him at the moment, and he didn't want to deal with someone else's cheating wife. Early went from room to room in the house that once was his home. He saw the memories and shoved those thoughts aside. He was planning what to take with him and what he ultimately wanted, making notes on his legal pad. He was in the basement when he heard the doorbell ring. Expecting Catherine, he girded himself as he answered the door, but it was a messenger from the PI firm with his copies of the pictures. Early looked through them quickly. They did show Susan and John Stickner eagerly engaging in consensual you-know-what. As he placed them on the mantel, he felt his stomach roil. He barely made it to the toilet before he puked again. But this time was different. Unlike the first time he vomited over his mess of a marriage, he didn't have the shakes and the cold sweats were milder. Early took that as a good sign. Hell, in times like those, he would take whatever good signs came his way. Catherine was the consummate professional when she arrived, never once asking about the impending divorce. She got the contract signed and installed a for sale sign in the front yard, then left without further comment. At 5:15, Cynthia Rogers, Early's divorce attorney, called to inform him the divorce papers were filed before the courthouse closed at 5. "Is a copy on the way to me?" Early asked. "Yes," Cynthia replied. "Good. I'll serve them on her." "Only if you have a disinterested party witness it," Cynthia said. "We need proof she was served the papers." "My PI will photograph me giving them to her," Early said. "That will work," Cynthia said. Early then called John Wells again and asked what was happening. "The second operative is in for the day. He got a few pictures, but nothing as damning as the ones taken earlier. Our current operative just called in. They are on the move. He said they were dressed like they were going someplace fancy and had suitcases with them. Keep following them," Early said. "And I need something else. I want someone out here ASAP to take pictures of the stuff in the house." "A photographic inventory?" Wells asked. "Exactly, but I need a witness, too. I need proof of what I did to her just in case she claims I did something violent, and I need proof the divorce papers were served." Wells asked neutrally, "Are you feeling particularly violent?" "No," Early replied. "But she and her lover are lawyers and liars by profession and practice. I just want to get out of this thing the best I can. We should video rather than use stills," Wells said. "Good idea. Call me when they get to their restaurant." "I'll call her there and confront her," Early said. "Do you want an operative to stay with you later?" "Why?" Early asked. "As a witness that you didn't do any harm to her after you confronted her?" Wells asked. "Good idea. Plan to watch me until further notice. I'm at home now." Early looked at his watch. It was almost 7. He hadn't slept in 38 hours, yet he wasn't sleepy. He was drained emotionally and empty inside, but he wasn't tired. He was hungry. He got into his car, went to a burger joint, and got a meal to go. When he turned back into his driveway, there was a nondescript Chevy parked out front. A nondescript man exited the Chevy and joined Early as he got to the front door. The man introduced himself as Bill Miller and gave Early his business card showing he was an operative for John Wells. Early finished his burger and was pleased his stomach felt fine. He was helping the operative inventory when the phone rang. It was John Wells again. "They're having dinner at the Queen Victoria Hotel on Vancouver Island," John Wells said. "And they have a room for the night." "Have they already registered?" Early asked. "Yes," John replied. "They checked in under the name of Mr. and Mrs. John Stickner." Early felt no anger at hearing Susan being called another man's wife. He knew that was a sign the marriage was over for good. "Thanks, John," Early said. "I'll call her now, so they'll probably be on the move again. You might warn your operative." Bill Miller watched Early as he attached the recording equipment to his cell phone. "Did I do this correctly?" Early asked. Miller checked it and replied, "It'll work just fine." Early turned on the recorder and dialed Susan's cell phone. She answered on the third ring. "Early," Susan said, sounding more perturbed than happy to hear from him. "Why are you calling at this time? Is everything all right?" "It's been a very long, very hard day," Early said. "How was yours?" "Long, too, but very productive. I got a lot of things off my desk," Susan said. "Where are you?" Early asked. He could hear sounds of the restaurant in the background. "I'm in our bedroom in our home. Where did you expect me to be?" Susan replied testily. Maybe a guilty conscience caused her tone of voice, Early thought. "I expected you to be at the house," Early said. "Say, you know that old watch my grandfather left me? I was talking to one of the guys down here about it. He's a watch collector, and he thinks he might be worth a bundle, but he can't be sure until he sees the serial number off the back. Will you get it and read me the serial number to me, please?" Early counted the seconds on his watch. It was 9 seconds before Susan said, "Honey, you can't possibly sell that old watch. Your grandfather left it to you, and you said you wanted to have a son to leave it to." "I'm not going to sell it," Early said, "but I do want to know how much it's worth. Now, where did you say you were?" "In our bedroom," Susan said. Early heard the tremor in her voice. "On the bed?" "Yes," she replied. The word caught in her throat. "Okay, look to your left. See the dresser?" Early asked. "Early, this is silly," Susan barked. "Why?" he asked. This time it was 7 seconds before Susan responded. "It just is," she said. "Humor me. Do you see the dresser?" Early said. "Yes," she whispered. "The watch in the bottom left-hand drawer in an old wooden case." He waited a few seconds as if giving her time to get off the bed and look. "Do you see it?" "No," Susan said. "Well, I'm at home in our bedroom looking in the bottom left-hand drawer and I see it. What I don't see is you." Early disconnected from Susan before she could say a word, turned off his cell phone, and took the house phone off the hook. "Will you keep the recording?" Early asked Bill Miller. "It's best that I do," Miller replied. "That way I can testify as to its authenticity." "How far is it from Vancouver Island?" Early asked. "An hour at this time of day." "Then I have 50 minutes to finish what I need to do," Early said. "Do you have a firearm?" Miller asked. "2 of them," Early replied.
I'm licensed.
"Let me have them. I'll keep them for you." "Good idea," Early replied. In a moment, he returned with both his pistols in their cases. The operative checked to make sure they were unloaded before taking them to his car. When the operative joined Early again, he said, "Is this your first divorce?" "It is," Early replied. "You're handling it well," Miller said. "Thanks," Early replied. Bill Miller looked at Early from his wrinkled, knowing face with its cool, sad eyes. He said, "But the hard part is yet to come. I don't know whether you'll want to immediately go out and get laid, or wait a while. Each guy reacts differently. Whichever it is, there will be plenty of available women. Getting laid is not the problem. The problem is trust. If you find another woman worth marrying, can you trust her? Will your blood pressure rise if she's a few minutes late? Will you think she's lying to you with every breath she takes? Will you think she told you big lies if you catch her in a little one? Will you wonder about her when she's not with you? You can't build a great marriage without trust. And if you don't care enough for trust to be an issue, you shouldn't be marrying her." "I can handle it," Early said, but he wondered. "I hope so. A lot of people can't." "You sound like the voice of experience," Early said. "I've been a private detective doing divorce work for 29 years. I've seen a lot of sorrow. Have you been married?" Early asked. 4 times and divorced 3, Miller said. My first wife is also my fourth one. She cheated on me and I dumped her. But years later. So your comments about not trusting comes from here, Miller said, tapping his chest over his heart. And in here. He put his hand on his stomach. Not here, he said as he tapped his head. That's what makes it so hard to trust again, particularly for a guy that makes his living with his mind like you do. The house was dark inside and the doors locked. The exterior security lights were on, flooding most of the front yard and driveway with light. Bill Miller was leaning against his car, ready to video the impending confrontation. Early's Mercedes, packed with the clothes and other items he thought he needed the next few days, was at the curb so it couldn't be blocked in. His reservation at a Holiday Inn was made. Early was walking around his house one last time when tires squealed and John Stickner's Lexus roared onto the driveway. Susan flew out the moment the car stopped. Bill Miller had the video rolling and was slowly moving toward the action. From the shadows, Early saw Susan, who was dressed in the slinky black cocktail dress taken from her closet. He had never seen her like this. She was distraught beyond his imagination, near hysteria, with her makeup running down her tear-streaked face. She stopped when she saw the for sale sign and her mouth fell open. Stickner, out of his car and beside her, tried to touch her and she jerked away. Susan saw movement in the shadows. Early, she gasped. Early came into the light, but he was walking toward the for sale sign, not Susan. Early, she screamed. She ran toward him, arms outstretched. But when she got close to him, Early hissed, "Don't touch me." His voice, so cold and dead and threatening, stopped her in place, where she stood as if frozen by the icy blast of his tone. He picked up an envelope leaning against the sign and withdrew a legal document. He handed the document to Susan, saying, "You are officially served with a lawsuit filed today in the case of Conroy versus Conroy, a petition for divorce on grounds of adultery. Mr. Stickner is named as your correspondent." He handed her the stack of photographs. "These are pictures of you two lovebirds happily fornicating. They will be a small part of the evidence at the trial." Early turned to walk away. "You F a hole," John Stickner growled as he grabbed Early's arm. Early didn't think. He let the red-faced adulterer turn him around and saw Stickner's fist coming his way. He took Stickner's blow on his shoulder and delivered one of his own. He felt the spatter of Stickner's blood on his face and saw Susan faint, dropping the pictures documenting her adultery on the grass around her. "Did you get it all, Bill?" he asked the operative. "Of course. Now get the hell out of here. I'll clean up." Early glanced at Stickner groaning in the grass with the side of his face crushed in. He looked long and hard at the woman he once had loved sprawled unconscious beside the for sale sign with pictures around her. He went to the Holiday Inn, registered, and went to his room. He filled the room's ice bucket from the ice machine. He returned to his room and poured himself a large bourbon on the rocks, filling the crystal highball glass he brought from home. He hated those cheap plastic motel glasses. He took off his shoes, propped his feet up, and turned on the TV. He stuck his bruised and battered hand into the ice bucket and sipped his whiskey. He was still sitting there 20 minutes later when someone knocked on his motel room door. He ignored them. "Early, it's Bill Miller," the voice at the door said. Getting out of that chair might have been the hardest thing he did all day, but Early managed, trudging to the door and opening it. Miller was standing there with another man about Miller's age. "This is Sergeant Simmons, Seattle PD," Miller said. Early motioned them in and collapsed in his chair again. Miller shut the door behind them, took Early's hand, and looked at it. He pushed and pulled, making Early wince. "I don't think it's broken," Miller said. The policeman cleared his throat. "Mr. Conroy, Mr. Stickner wants us to file assault charges against you. You messed him up pretty good. A surgeon is trying to repair his broken cheekbone now. Life's tough all over," Early said in a flat tone. His eyes were dead and no emotion registered on his face. "You don't care that the man is facing multiple surgeries to repair what you did?" Sergeant Simmons asked. "How do I repair what he did to me?" Early asked the policeman without looking at him. "I could arrest you for assault, Mr. Conroy, but Bill here assures us it was self-defense, and he has the video to prove it. Although I haven't seen it yet," Sergeant Simmons said. "You'll get it in the morning," Miller said. So what happens now? Early said. No arrest will be made until we've seen the evidence. If Bill's wrong, and your punch wasn't in self-defense, we will file charges. That's the law. It's a stupid law, Early said in the same flat tone. The sergeant studied the despondent man before saying, you can expect a civil suit. Not hardly, Early replied. Lawsuits bring facts out in the open, and these two lawyers will want to bury this like a cat buries its shit. I can guarantee you of that. Sergeant Simmons waited as police officers do so well. When he thought sufficient time has passed, he said, aren't you going to ask about your wife? I don't have a wife. Your wife, the sergeant began. Early jammed his feet on the floor and sat up as if to spring into action. Aren't you listening to me? Early said loudly, I do not have a wife. The sergeant stood. Don't leave the county without clearing it with me. And, Mr. Conroy, don't do anything rash. Early only nodded. Want me to stay in here? Miller asked Early. Early shook his head. I'll be outside in my car if you need me. I go off at midnight, but someone will be there. Take care of yourself. Thanks, Bill, for everything, Early said. The two men left Early alone. It was done. The divorce papers were filed. His confrontation of Susan was over. His life with Susan was over. Gone like dust in the wind. Early was too tired to undress. He downed the rest of his drink, crawled into the bed, and pulled the covers over himself. He began to cry, fighting his tears until they overwhelmed him. He cried until he had no more tears to give, leaving a man broken but unbowed. Early knew he would get up tomorrow and go on. He knew the weekend would be hell, but Monday morning he would go to work and bury himself in the familiar routines. He knew his life would get better day by day and be good again someday. He knew someone else would come along for him. He knew all that in his mind. In his heart and in his gut, there was a gaping, bleeding, black, empty hole. He felt like a deer that had been gutted, its entrails ripped out and fed to the dogs with the carcass left hanging in a tree. He wondered if he would ever be whole again. He wondered if he could ever trust again. With that thought, he slept like the dead.